Welcome to From Rome.Info video. My name is Brother Alexis Bugnolo, and this is the documentary on Pope Benedict's Renunciation, the facts, the laws, and the consequences. This is the 5th episode, and we're going to discuss now the reaction to Pope Benedict's declaration of February 11th, what happened immediately following and in the days following, and how it corresponds to what he said. In our next episode, we'll discuss whether his act fulfilled the norms of the law, and we'll start addressing the more complex arguments. So, the consistory for the canonization of 3 groups of saints, one whom was the martyrs of Otranto, who were martyred in 1480, not in the 15th century, not in the 16th century, as I said in my previous program. Excuse me for that small error, and thank you for the correction from the audience. Was for that. It was not to resign from the papacy. So Pope Benedict read this declaratio at about 11:30 that morning, Rome time, and it took him about 10 minutes to read it. He finished at 11:40, so the reports say. I think you could read that in faster than 10 minutes, but maybe he read it slowly. And the cameras were not even turned on him until after he began reading it. So we don't have a complete audio recording of everything he said that morning, but it was evident that he did say several errors. So the consistory ended sometime before noon, and within minutes, at around 11:58, there's announced to the world what happened. So who did the announcement and how did it happen? Obviously, in a matter of this kind, if the Pope does resign, the first person to take charge after the consistory should be the Dean of the College of Cardinals, who in this case was Cardinal Sodano. He should have a private conference with the Pope and start asking about details. And then formal action should be taken to announce to what happened, because the meeting in the Clementine Hall was a private, semi-private meeting. There were some journalists watching, and in fact, matter of fact, one journalist from ANSA, which is a news agency here in Italy, she's a pool reporter, her name is Giovanni Chiri, was watching the events on a monitor in some other location. I still don't know where she was when she was watching it. And she listened to the Latin, and she got an idea of what was going on, and she tried to call Cardinal Sodano. He didn't pick up. After repeated tries, she got in contact with Father Lombardi, who was the person for the Roman Pontiff, Vatican Press Office, I actually believe his title is. And he gave her, she told him what she thought happened, and he said, go ahead and publish it to the world. So before I say what she said, there's already something very wrong here, okay? So if the Pope is just renounced, that is the most important news story you could possibly have. Why give the go-ahead to an unknown reporter who was not even there and watched it on the screen, so you don't really know how much she heard? Did she hear the whole talk? Did she understand it right? She doesn't have a degree in Latin, and she doesn't have a degree in canon law. But look, Father Lombardi chose her to announce to the world what happened. So that's already very significant, because if they had called a news conference and asked all the top journalists and controversialists like Sochi or Tosati or Valli to come to the conference, they would have asked questions, and they would have asked intelligent questions. And you'll see what questions they'll ask, because they're going to be the same questions you'll ask in a moment. So as we see from what in the previous episode, what did Pope Benedict say? We hear that he said munus in ministerium, and we hear that he declared that he renounced the ministry committed to him by the hands of the cardinals. And this is what Giovanni Chiri tweeted out at 11:58 Rome time that morning. Okay, Rome was on daylight savings times in the winter time, so it would be 12:58 in the standard time, in the summer savings time. Okay, here's her tweet. I'll read the Italian first. B16 si è dimesso, lascia pontificato dal 28 febbraio. She got 212 likes. The tweet is still on Twitter. You can go to ampersand sign Giovanna Chiri, Chirri. Giovanna is Giovanna, and her tweet appears on February 11th, 2013, and you'll find it either at 11:58 or 12:58, and she has 212 likes, and it's still out there. Giovanna Chiri subsequently gave, I think, 2 or 3 interviews, 2 to the Famiglia Cristiana here in Italy, which is a Jesuit publication, talking about her experience of the moment. And I'll relate as best I remember from reading her reports in the time, interviews in the time. Basically, she became totally shocked that something tremendous was happening. Her throat clammed up. She could hardly breathe. She started having kind of like an asthma fit or a panic attack, that she was going to have this great scoop. And she was shaking. Her legs were shaking. She didn't know what to do, who to call, how to get the word out. We can see already there's something immature here, because if you're a journalist and you have important news, you try to say something more than one sentence. And then you follow up on an article. I haven't seen any articles following up. I don't think any newspaper in the world published an article by her about what happened. And here's the reason why. She says, she uses 2 words in this statement that are not contained in what Pope Benedict has said. So she says, B16, now say in English what her tweet is. B16 has resigned. He leaves the pontificate on the 28th of February. Okay, so the Italian word si è dimesso is he's resigned. But that's the past tense, which means it's already happened. Well, as we can see from Pope Benedict's declaration, he didn't resign. In that statement, he said that he was declaring that he resigned the ministry so that on the 28th, okay, so to resign the papacy, you have to resign the papacy, okay, but he didn't say I resign the papacy. He said, I declare that I renounce the ministry committed to me so that on the 28th of February. So it didn't happen in the past. If you think it is a juridical act and that it has value, then at least you must say it won't happen until the 28th. And her correct tweet, and she certainly had enough characters to say it, was he announces that he will resign. But no, she said he has resigned. The other thing, she says he leaves the pontificate. The word pontificate is not in his declaration, neither is the word leave in his declaration. So she has, okay, 3 words now that are not in the declaration. So if she's told Lombardi what she was going to tweet out, why did he give her approval for this? Now, if you look at all the other journalists that tweeted that day, and I've seen all the news articles, and a lot of them too, in many languages, no one says what she says. All the other journalists say, Pope Benedict has renounced the ministry, or they'll say the Petrine ministry or the papal ministry. None of them say he has resigned, okay? And surprise, surprise, but 3 years after afterwards, in an interview, Giovanna Chiri no longer says that Pope Benedict resigns, that he leaves the pontificate. She says he renounced the ministry, so she corrected herself. The thing is that this tweet of Giovanna Chiri is what the whole world believes happens. And no one pays any attention to what Benedict said in the Latin. And everyone in the church is acting as if this tweet is the act of renunciation. Because although no one else said it, this is the meaning that was given to the act. Okay? So I call her the mother of the renunciation, because she was the one that told everyone in the world that he renounced, and what she said has never been refuted. It's been accepted by all, even though she has withdrawn it. So if the reporter who said it has withdrawn it, why should we believe it? Why should any canonist believe it? And the canonists all try to prove that what she said is correct, and you can't do it because those words aren't in his declaratio. So Benedict, I believe, felt betrayed by what happened. Okay, and I'll show you this now. Because on the 14th of February, now we're just 3 days later, he has a meeting with all the clergy of Rome. I think it was like I don't know if it was pre-programmed that he would have this meeting, but everyone expected, all the clergy in Rome were there, and they expected him to give his final words for leaving the pontificate. As you would expect, if he just renounced, as Giovanni Curie said, then he's going, and this is his last meeting with all of us, the priest would obviously say he's going to give us some last final encouraging words, and he didn't do that. And this is the strangest thing. I was in Rome in 2013. I listened to some of that talk. I read the thing. He gave a talk on Vatican II and how Vatican II was misinterpreted. And at the time, it was bizarre. There was a lot of comments on bloggers in Italy. They're all saying, like, if he just renounced, why is he not even talking about that to the clergy of Rome? And there's only one obvious reason. There's only one sane, I mean, if you assume Benedict is sane and an honest man, the only reasonable conclusion is because he didn't resign. Okay? That's the only reasonable conclusion. Or you'd have to say he's such a Pharisee that he prepared some kind of statement to the clergy on a prearranged meeting that had nothing to do with his renunciation, even though Ganswein says he had decided 6 months ago. And so he was pretending, he was going to pretend that he didn't resign, and the last moment he resigned, and but that doesn't make sense, okay? But if you listen to that talk, it's 58 minutes long in Italian, and I've listened to the whole thing, and I can understand it. I know my Italian that well enough. He says some important things. He says, what the council was is not what the world knows it to be, because its documents were in Latin, but it was proclaimed to the world in the vernacular through journalists who misrepresented what really happened and made people think it wasn't what it was. And then he goes on to say, if you follow these principles and attend to these problems, you will avoid similar errors. Now, Benedict's an intelligent man. What is he telling us? It's obviously what he's telling us. He's telling us that what I did on February 11th, 4 days ago, has been misrepresented by Giovanni Curie and the international press because I didn't resign. Look at the words I said. They're not what she said I said. Okay, that's what he's saying. But he doesn't say that. Okay, so what's the next inference we can draw? He was somehow forced to read that statement. That's the only, or he fears to say what that statement really means. Okay, so there was force applied to him to read the statement, or he was forced to do something and he pretended to resign and did not, so as to avoid what they demanded of him and yet avoid the threat. Okay, that's the only sane thing. Otherwise, you have to say the Benedict is completely insane, but he wasn't completely insane. And he showed it in his talk to the clergy. A 58-minute talk. And he did it without notes. He had notes in front of him, but he doesn't look at the notes. He talks for 58 minutes from memory about in a very detailed way about the Second Vatican Council and how it was represented by the media. So the man is not stupid. He's not incompetent, and he's not the kind of man to make 40 errors in Latin. Okay, which his text has. Okay, so one of the opinions I have is that text wasn't written by him. It was written in haste, and because we know that on February 7th or 8th, Gotti, who is a German nobleman, and Pope Benedict had him assigned to do auditing of books at the Vatican, who was dismissed in the summer of 2012. Without Benedict's permission, but I think with his Secretary of State's permission, who was Bertone, was called back to the Vatican on like the 7th or the 8th. And I know this because he told someone here in Rome who told me exactly what he said. So this is not published, but this is, and I have a very reliable source. And he had an hour meeting with Cardinal Bertone, and Cardinal Bertone said, Pope Benedict didn't know you were forced out, and he didn't even authorize it. He heard about it, first of all, on the television, and it shocked him. And he wants you to return to your duties and continue your work editing the books. Okay? And he was like overwhelmed. I can't imagine this. I'm going to get my job back. And Pope Benedict actually exercised his authority to undo what the Curia wanted to get rid of him because there's all out of corruption in the Curia. And then 4 days later, Benedict resigns, making his decision to reappoint Gotti null and void. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. However, if Gotti was going to find accounts, money accounts, that shouldn't have been there, forcing Benedict out was the only way to stop it at that point. Okay, because Gotti was coming back if Benedict remained. But if Benedict went, Gotti wouldn't come back. And subsequently, we know that something like, I think, $500 million or 600 million euro were discovered in hidden accounts in the Roman Curia by the auditing done by Bugnolo. And that's what they've told us. They were found in hidden accounts, but were they hidden accounts of the Roman Curia, or were they of the CIA or foreign intelligence agencies that were washing money, or criminal organizations washing money through the Vatican, who really are the ones controlling what goes on in the Vatican, and are the ones who forced Benedict out by some kind of threat that we yet do not know. Okay. So we have proven evidence. What Giovanni Ciri says doesn't correspond to what Benedict says. So this is a fact. You can't argue against a fact. It's a fact because no one denies it, and she says it, and it's never been refuted, that Lombardi gave her permission after he spoke with Sodano. So we have the chain of links there. And we have Benedict 3 days later saying, don't listen to what them journalists say about an event. Go back to the words. Okay, so it's pretty darn clear. The next thing we have is on the 18th of February, Pope Benedict publishes a document which modifies the papal law on elections. Okay, so if he's just resigned, you would expect in that modification he'd say something about popes resigning, because in that papal law there's only a oblique reference to the resignation of the Pope, and there's some things that really should be in there that are not. No, he doesn't do anything of the kind. In his February 18th, Normus Non Nullus, he makes some modifications of what to do in the case of a papal funeral. So is he thinking he's going to die before they have the conclave? Or is he telling us, okay, is he telling us in an indirect way, I'm going to be Pope until I die because I have not resigned, okay? Because Normus Non Nullus was a document prepared in the Roman Curia that was going to be published in February. Benedict knew about it for like 6 months, so he could have changed anything in it. He didn't, okay? And this, I think he's giving us signs. I honestly think that he's giving us signs, because otherwise he's acting irrationally, and yet he's perfectly rational. He can talk for 58 minutes on a very detailed argument in Italian, which is not his native language, and explain something in a very subtle way, but to intelligent people, okay? They'd be able to understand it. And during his talk to the clergy, many didn't understand what he was saying. They were absolutely dismayed. I didn't understand at the time, too, because I didn't know all these facts and I didn't connect them together. So that is what happened in the first few days. On the 27th of February, in his final allocution, he actually says, I have not given up the cross. I'm just going up the mountain, and I'm going to serve in a manner of prayer. So the obligation I received as Pope is something I haven't rejected. The yes I gave is a yes forever. So he's just saying over and over that I have not renounced all the papacy. And in a good study that's being done in Spanish out of Costa Rica, they did an analysis of what Pope Benedict said about what he feels he's not able to do in his declaration, remember, from yesterday, from the episode 4? And what he says on the 27th and the 28th about what he's giving up and what he's not giving up. And you can see that he never says he's giving up the munus. And of his actions, exercise of that office, he says he feels he's not able to do certain of the things. He still feels he can pray and that he can speak and that he can write, okay? So he hasn't renounced all the aspects of what he thinks the papal office means. And therefore, even in his own mind, you can't argue that he intended to renounce, okay? Now, this is the evidence, and I'm not saying to you anything that anyone in the Curia doesn't know. They all know this evidence. And yet we have individuals like Cardinal Burke, who are in 2018, I think it was 2019, in an interview with Diane Montagna for LifeSite News, said, I think it would be very difficult to prove that Benedict did not intend to resign. And he was a judge of the Roman Rotary Signature. So he knows how to look at evidence, and yet he says something that's absolutely unfounded, because the evidence says quite the contrary. Just look at the evidence. So either he never looked at the evidence, or he wants the evidence to make it appear it is. And if you haven't looked at the evidence, you should not say that, what he said. So the cardinals seem to have not cared at all about the evidence. They seem to have been very glad to find someone who didn't know what she was talking about tweet out to the world and go along with what she said, because they're not going along with what Pope Benedict has said. And in the next episode, I'll show that they're not even going along with what all of canon law says. So is this a conspiracy to oust Pope Benedict? I'll let you decide, but I think the evidence speaks for itself. This is, my name is Brother Alexis Bugnolo, and this has been the documentary on Pope Benedict's Renunciation, the facts, the laws, and the consequences, episode 5. In the next episode, I'll discuss whether Benedict fulfilled the law and what actually, canonically, is the value of what he did. God bless. Thank you.